You're watching VinylicPumaGaming. Hey guys, back with another Fallout video, and today I figured I'd take the challenge of discussing whatever happened to Australia in the post-war period in the Fallout universe. Now, before we get into this video, a lot of this particular video is going to be based on speculation. There's not really a whole lot we know about countries outside of the United States, and while we do know some things about places like China, Europe, the Middle East, Russia, and some other places, very few, if any, of the countries that appear in the Southern Hemisphere are ever discussed in the Fallout games. Even still, speculating about what happened to somewhere like Australia that has a relatively high population is a pretty interesting subject to tackle. So without further ado, let's discuss some of the lore or lack thereof as it pertains to Australia in the Fallout universe. Now, we know virtually nothing about Australia or what happened to it in the Fallout universe. With that said, it's speculated that one of the NPCs in Fallout 2, Ymir, was from Australia. However, as far as I can tell, none of his dialogue specifically mentions Australia. Unlike places like Great Britain, Ireland, China, Russia, and Europe, we have very few, if any, lore resources to go on. This includes things like the Fallout Bible, as well as the main series of Fallout games, as well as the spin-off Fallout games. All we really know is that the history of Australia was consistent with our own timeline up until the end of the Second World War. After that, the divergence would have presumably changed certain ways that Australia developed in our own timeline. Something we can say for sure is that Australia does exist within the Fallout universe. If you look at various maps or the globes in Fallout 4, then you'll notice that Australia does appear and looks like you would expect it to on a globe from our own real world. Historically, Australia was known for being a colony of Great Britain or the United Kingdom. As a result of losing their American colonies, the British established penal colonies in parts of Australia. Places like New South Wales, Queensland, Van Diemen's Land, also known as Tasmania, and Norfolk Island were places where the British Empire sent its various prisoners and other convicts. Now, the British Empire had a lot of prisoners and various convicts because of the result of development of new technologies, making farm work scarce. So what happened is people moved to more populated areas. Many individuals were poor and people had to steal to survive, and those that got caught were ultimately shipped to Australia. I also suppose the idea here was to get virtually free labor to develop areas that most non-convicts would not have been interested in developing. And this was a common practice of many European colonial empires like the British and the French empires. In fact, the American colonies were used as penal colonies by the British to basically develop the area at a lower cost too. Now, with this said, I suppose it's worth mentioning that roughly 162,000 or so British convicts were sent to Australia, and that there are also many people that came to settle in Australia of their own accord. In 1901, Australia gained significant, however not complete, independence from the British government. In 1931, most of the constitutional links between the British and Australian government were ended with the Statute of Westminster. However, Australia didn't appear to gain complete independence from the United Kingdom until 1986, which eliminated the United Kingdom's role in the Australian government entirely. Now, if you're like me and you're not a native of Australia, it's unclear when exactly Australia became independent of the United Kingdom. What I can say is that it appears in 1901 that Australia became mostly autonomous from the British Empire. However, it was still recognized as a part of it. Over time, the Australian government would lessen British influence until 1986, where the Australia Act pretty much abolished all influence that the British had over Australia. So from 1901 to 1986, legislation drafted and enacted in the United Kingdom could still affect Australia, despite the fact that Australia might as well have been independent at that point. As far as the Fallout universe is concerned, I think we could say that Australia might as well be independent from the United Kingdom as well. However, with that said, there is the possibility that the British Privy Council may still have some influence over the Australian government. There is a possibility that Australia is entirely independent in the Fallout universe, and there is a possibility that it's also not. What I think we can say for sure is that the Australia Act of 1986 didn't happen largely due to the divergence of the Fallout universe's timeline from our own. If I had to place a bet on it, my thinking is that Australia eventually gained complete independence from Britain sometime before the Great War occurred. In the real world, and according to Wikipedia, Australia has the world's 13th largest economy by nominal GDP. To put this in perspective, Australia's economy is about on par with Canada's, South Korea's, Russia's, and Spain's in terms of GDP. Overall, Australia is considered to be a fairly wealthy country. In general, most of Australia's economy appears to be based around the mining of gold, coal, and other minerals. While gas exports do appear to be important to the Australian economy, mining is what appears to contribute the most to Australia's economic growth. Australia exports many of its goods and services primarily to China, Japan, South Korea, the United States, and India. Militarily speaking, Australia doesn't really have a particularly large military. According to globalfirepower.com, Australia has less than 100,000 active frontline personnel. And to put this in perspective, the United States has about 1 million active personnel, with another million in reserves. I think it's also important to mention that unlike the countries of Europe, the People's Republic of China, Russia, and the United States, Australia does not have nuclear weapons, though it is possible that they may have developed them in the Fallout universe. Geographically speaking, Australia is about the same size as the United States and is comprised of several different climates. While significant portions of Australia are comprised of deserts, it does have its fair share of tropical and Mediterranean climates. In general, most of the center of Australia is desert, where most people tend to live closer to the coasts. Australia is considered to also be a very biodiverse country, with notable animals being things like kangaroos, the echidna, which is similar but different to a hedgehog, the platypus, and the koala. It's also worth mentioning that the Great Barrier Reef is just off the coast of Queensland, Australia, and this area alone is home to a significant amount of diverse sea creatures as well. Like Canada, Australia does tend to have a fair number of immigrants, with the majority of people coming from the United Kingdom, New Zealand, the People's Republic of China, India, and the Philippines. There are also the Aboriginal peoples of Australia as well, which are the descendants of the original indigenous peoples that lived in Australia before colonization by European empires. While I won't get too political here, in a certain sense, the Aboriginal citizens of Australia had conflicts with the non-Indigenous peoples of Australia that was much like America's struggle for civil rights in the 1950s and 1960s. It appears that over time, relations between non-Indigenous and Indigenous Australians have improved. Now, of course at this point, you might be wondering, what happened to Australia after the Great War? Well, it seems likely that Australia would have felt the impact of the Great War. It's fair to say that major population centers like Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, and Perth would be candidates for nuclear bombardment. However, other population centers may fare a little bit better and may be more or less affected by the Great War. It's unclear whether Australia was at war with anyone during the resource wars that preceded the Great War, and it is highly likely that Australia remained allied with the United States after the Second World War. With this said, one of Australia's major trading partners in our real world is the People's Republic of China, and there is a high probability that this remains the case in the Fallout universe as well. So it's safe to say that both the United States and China would certainly have competing interests in the country. At the same time, there's the possibility that only United States military bases in Australia would be nuked, and some of the larger population centers would be relatively unaffected. One U.S. military base in our own real world is Pine Gap, which is located in the central desert part of Australia, far enough away from major population centers like Brisbane, Sydney, Melbourne, and Perth. If anything, it's likely that what will hurt the most people would be the ensuing fallout, and not necessarily the nuclear bombardment itself. If this is the case, then Australia may actually be in pretty good shape during the post-war era, while other pre-war countries like America and China would have been completely dissolved. Granted, I'm sure some level of ghoulification and significant mutation among Australia's wildlife might make certain parts of the country extremely dangerous. At the end of the day, it's possible that Australia could largely be okay. Now, while it's not technically a part of Australia, it is worth mentioning that New Zealand is sometimes considered to be a relatively safe country to be in if something like the Great War were to break out. However, in general, most countries in the Southern Hemisphere are typically safer than those in the Northern Hemisphere, like China, Russia, Europe, and the United States. It's really hard to say what exactly would happen to Australia. However, my thinking would be that while they would probably get hit by nukes, it would be far less severe than a country located in the Northern Hemisphere. With this said, the state of Australia in the Fallout universe is greatly going to be determined by the country's relationship with China and the United States, and it may also depend on whether Australia has completely broken ties with the United Kingdom. If you ask me though, Australia, like a few other foreign countries, could be an interesting setting for a Fallout game. While you would definitely miss the late 1950s American vibe, and vault tech may not be a thing, there would be several things that would replace it. Who knows? It could be interesting to encounter enlarged radiation-mutated platypi, irradiated kangaroo, or other exotic wildlife that's native to Australia. While I don't think we'll see an actual Fallout game take place in Australia, it would be neat to encounter more NPCs that are from post-war Australia that can give us an idea of what happened over there during and following the Great War. Until then, I suppose we'll just have to keep speculating. Alright guys, that's going to wrap up this particular video. If you like this video, please be sure to leave a like and let me know, what do you think happened to Australia? Leave it in the comments, but otherwise, like this video if you liked it, click the bell to join the notification squad, and as always, take care, and I'll see y'all next time.